No, I want save files. Save files is what I want. Save files. So here, let me click on something that's not there. Icon, let's do something a little bigger. Sockets.cpp. So I just sent that file. This is not a check-in. No metadata. I didn't do anything with the database. I just sent the file. But it's, you know, so this summer, as part of the summer projects, I'm going to build out my own repository, okay? And what I will do is I'll keep this, you know, click to send a file, but what I'll do is I'll pop up a window, before I do anything, pop up a window, let you enter metadata. Right now, when I double click that file, it's sending a sending file message with no other specific attributes, okay? And the server's sitting there and saying, I don't know what you sent me, message unknown, because there's no server proc there looking for it. So it says unknown command because, you know, I didn't provide a server proc intentionally. Exercise left for the student. So, but what I would do is double click, I would pop up a window that lets me add metadata into the message, and I would add it as message attributes into that sending file message with the file name. And then I would send it, and I would add a server proc. So I would have a server proc that when that message comes in, extracts that data out of the, you know, it adds an element in the database that's the file name, you know, with all the right, you know, does the versioning and all that stuff, and pulls metadata information, description, and author, and that kind of stuff, and puts it in the NoSQL database, what I would do. And I think, you know, as you're, anybody that isn't there yet, if you're going to try to use this demo to finish up your project, you need to do something like that. Remote tab, you know, like does exactly what it always did. Connect tab, nothing there. Here's a suggestion that maybe instead of hardwiring ports and machine names, you enter here. I'm going to come back to this because there's a little control story. We'll come back to that. And of course, there's a query that says empty. Okay. Probably a control there. There's an about button that displays a nice little about message, which is exactly this text. So if I decided I wanted to add a little more, all I do is change the about message a little bit. Now it's got more about information. But anyway, you know, so okay. So let's take a look at the GUI. I want to look at main window, XAML. Tab control, tab item, tab, boy, that's not very long. Tab item, local nav control. Tab item, local remote nav control. Tab item, about control. I have, for each of these tabs that I've implemented, local, remote, and about, I've implemented a control. And I'll show you how that works. What that does is that factors all that XAML and the code behind out of the main window. So now the main window is smaller, easier to understand, easier to get your arms around, and each tab is just focused on that one tab, smaller, easier to understand. Okay. In order, you want, when you have a control, like you want to be able to communicate back and forth from the window to the control and from the control back to the window. If you make the functions and data internal, internal means it's accessible anywhere in that assembly. So if you declare it as internal, the main window can access the data or the function, and the control can access the main windows. So, for example, I think the main window should be the guy that decides what's my listening port going to be. Shouldn't be the control. It ought to be the main window. That's his, you know. And he ought to decide what the name is, machine name is. And he ought to decide what the server port is. Okay. So what happens here is, I'll show you in a couple of minutes, that the main window simply, the control window simply goes and uses the main window endpoint for the endpoint that it needs to construct that message. Okay. So the design partly is deciding who ought to know what. Okay. Where does it make the most sense to put that knowledge, and only put it one place. Don't put it in, don't duplicate it. So let's see how that control is designed. So here's local nav control. So user control, okay, and then here's just what I did was I went into my original design and I cut, over here, paste. Didn't do too much more than that. And if you look at, so let's look at local nav control. So see if I'm doing that here. I've forgotten whether I'm doing that here. Yeah. So here in this file list mouse double click, main window win equals main window window dot get window this. This gives the this gives this control a reference to the window, and now he just says when he wants to use the send files path. So here, destination. So what he's going to do is he's going to you know, he needs what he's going to do is he's going to copy the file from where it was where you clicked it into the send files directory. Remember that my client has a send files and save files, and the server has a send file and save files directory. Those are staging files for the file transfer. And then, you know, so this guy just copies it from wherever it was, wherever he found it, clicked on it, it copies it into that staging area to send out, so that the COM only has one place to look for those files. And that's where that was delivered. That file was delivered. If you saw me in my, when I double clicked on the file list, that file popped up in the saved files in the server. Okay, so it's up to that server proc to go and copy that file into wherever. Okay, I didn't want to decide for you how the server was going to manage its storage. That's part of your design. Okay, so anyway, and if you look at these, you know, some of these say internal, internal, internal. So anything that says internal, or public, of course, the main window can get at. So the main window, for example, he can just write, I think the main window should decide what the local storage route's going to be and what the remote storage route's going to be. And so he just writes it into the control. Okay, now you look at this and you say, cool, these are identical, they can be the same control. Well, the XAML is identical, almost identical, not quite. XAML is almost identical, but the code behind is quite different. the code behind in the remote is making up a message and sending it over to the server. The code behind in the local is just using system.io.directory to find files. And, okay? So they're very different. So they're built as separate controls, different controls. But still, you get this nice factoring. We're just pulling stuff out of the main window into this separate control, which is cool. Okay, let's see what else I want to say here. If you look at the server, so here in my server, here's my NoSQL database. Okay, it's just a data member of the server. Some of you have used a repository core, you know, but I use the server itself as a repository. Some people are hosting a repository core in their server. That's okay. Essentially would work the same way. But you put this in your repository core rather than in a server, maybe. But anyway, here's the database, and I'm just in very trivial way. Here I say, in my constructor of the server, initialize DB. And what that's doing, where did I put that? So that's probably down in the, let me just go to definition. So initialize server DB, all I'm doing is creating a database element, given a name and a description, payload, blah, 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 payload, DB element equal name, and then I'm showing it. That's all I'm doing with the database in this one function in the server. But it shows you that the server can read and write from the database and how to hook that up, okay? And now in order to do it, for a check-in, for example, now you'd have to have a server proc that does check-in, and the server proc will doing exactly the same kind of thing, only it'll need a DB provider. Or, you could, in the Lambda, you could have the Lambda take the address of a database, of a NoSQL database, okay? And so now the dispatcher hands each Lambda the reference to the database, however you want to do it. Either way is fine. But that's the model. Right, guys? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, you guys are going to be at the hot end of this discussion. Okay, so I've asked the TAs to make sure they were here to hear this discussion so that they would be able to help people who needed it. So let's go look at the about a little more. So now for a lot of you, you can ignore this. Look at it a little bit and say, oh, there might be some good ideas here. Well, I'll put them away for some later use, okay? Don't go pulling your projects apart. This was intended for those people who are way behind, or struggling to get stuff pulled together, and we're having trouble pulling stuff together. So Project 4 demo is intended to help you pull all the necessary parts for Project 4 together: GUI, client, server, message passing, com, and now NoSQL database. And again, all I did was I went to the Project 4 help, took CPP NoSQL DB folder, select, copy, went into the my Project 4 demo folder, paste, and I made a reference in the server, server project to that NoSQL database. And then, the supporting actors now, datetime, DB core, payload, blah, blah, blah. This is not a complete solution for the Project 4 requirements, but it does give you a framework for implementing them. Tabs, local to show client files and directories, remote to show server files and directories, Connect to suggest one way to avoid hard coding machine code endpoints. It's blank. Query to suggest a way for you to show selected contents of the database. It's blank. I think there's some interesting things one can do here. I like the form of the NoSQL, my solution to the NoSQL database. I like that real well. I like the way it works. I like the language it provides. But the repository needs a little help. I think the repository needs a query builder. And some interesting, how do I construct a query builder to make it really simple for the repository code to use it to do all the kinds of queries it needs to do? So you need to think about what are all the queries they need to do. The query builder has to build those queries, so. And queries, queries can add stuff to a database as well as, I have, in my NoSQL database, I have a template method called select, and that method can do, and it just accepts a callable object. You can do whatever you want. You can add stuff to the database with that select, just fine. Just like you can add stuff to a NoSQL database with a query, with a SQL query. You can do the same thing with a NoSQL. So anyway, I think there's some interesting thinking, interesting design thoughts to make for this query, but so what does this do? Shows the local and remote directories and files. Double-clicking on a directory navigates into that directory and shows its contents for both local and remote locations. Double-clicking on a file in the local navigator will send the file from the client to the server. Note that this is not a check-in. It just sends the file to the server's saved files directory, that staging area. The server in this demo doesn't have a server proc for receiving files, so it reports an unknown command. The communication channel sends it, and it goes into that staging area, but the server, it gets a send file command, and it doesn't have a server proc to do it, so it just reports an unknown command. Providing that is up to you. Double-clicking on a file in the remote navigator will send the file from the server to the client. Note that this is not a checkout. It just sends the file to the client's saved files directory and pops up a code viewing window. On startup, the server instantiates its NoSQL DB with a demo element and displays on the console. Shows you how to get the server to read and write from and to the DB. It does not do anything else with the DB. That's up to you. Okay. There is also a grid row on the main display suitable for use as a status bar. You'll need to add a text block or a status bar element and write to it when that seems appropriate. This demo does not do that. It's just this. It's just this. I must have started debugging. I didn't mean to. But anyway, it's just this bar down here. That's all. Didn't mean to put you in debugging mode. So, alrighty. Any questions about the demo? So, for all you guys who are on the verge of submitting, things are, you like what you're doing, it's all things are coming. Don't go tearing anything over. This is not intended for you. It's intended for people who are really having trouble getting anything to work, and so it pulls all the parts together so that they can make some progress one by one. And what I would do is I would take each tab, I would allocate a tab for check-in, allocate a tab, so whatever, and then the scheme is, so now here there is a database, all the elements are here that you need, so now the scheme is decide what you want to do, create a message for that action, create a client proc, create a server proc, test it, move on to the next thing. Just picking them up and putting them down. Okay. Yes.
If we use a server prototype as a repository, so in project 2 we are required to separate the check-in, check-out as separate project to demonstrate it well. But if we use the server prototype as a repository, can we just figure the check-in, check-out function just as some function?
Sure. However you want to do it.
Okay.
This is not trying to tell you how to do your design. All it's trying to do is help anybody who is behind
So we are not
catch up.
obligated to.
You're not obligated to do anything. You can totally ignore it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, and another question about the local nav control. So, so does that mean that multiple tabs can use the same tab control?
I'm not using the same tab control. They can. So here, so let me pull up main window XAML again. So in main window XAML, each tab, I just have a control. Now, and they could use the same control, but here, that's what I said before, I made separate controls. They both local nav and remote nav have this virtually the same XAML, but their code behinds are very different. And so the easiest thing to do is just make them separate controls.
But they have the same structure. But
They have the same XAML.
Oh, but they are independent with it.
They have very different code behind. Okay, so what I'm saying is that local nav control XAML is very like remote nav control XAML, but local nav control XAML.cs is very different from remote nav control.xaml.cs. Okay.
So you use this different stack to
Yeah.
store the path.
So I took that. Basically what I did was I developed the remote nav control first. All I did was factor out that, into a separate control. And then when I wanted to do the local nav control, I just added the new control, and I copied the contents, and then I just changed it. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to strong types?
So what do you mean when you say when you browse you can add elements to the DB? Like when you browse, you can add elements to the DB? What does that mean? Based on a query.
I don't think I said anything about adding elements to the DB when you browse.
So for the queries.
So I have a local file list, and I clicked on it to send a file, but I'm not really doing a check-in. But so I just, I come along here, and I showed you that when I click on this local, that it sends the file. And now, what I would do were I gonna add check-in, I would use this, but now in my handler, in my event handler, the double-click handler here in the local nav, I would pop up a window that accepted all the metadata for that file, and I would build a message. So what this guy's doing, what this double-click event handler is now doing, is simply building a sending file message, which triggers and it copies the file into the staging area for the place where the communication system is expecting it in the server send files, in the server prototype send files. And then it just sends it. But what I would do is I'd pop up a window to build a message with all the attributes, all that metadata attributes that I needed, okay, and then send it. So that would add another window, another little quick pop-up window and a little more message handling. Instead of just building a simple send file, now I'm going to add I'll pull those attribute information out of that pop-up window and put it in the send file. Okay, and then I would probably I would have my handler kill that window, okay, and send it, okay. And then you need a proc on the other end that now in comes that message, and so what it's going to do is copy the file from the staging area to wherever your model of what the server is going to do with it, and then pull the metadata out and put it in the database, you know. So, did that answer your question, Jessica? Was that? No, I didn't answer the question. So what's your question? Ask your question again. Let me see if I can answer it.
I don't know what I heard, actually. I'll just go back and rewatch the video when you mentioned the query. When you mentioned the query part, you mentioned that you select and you can add a callable object to the select function.
Oh.
And then you said
Oh,
something
okay.
adding.
So that had nothing to do with browsing.
Yeah, not
But,
to do
okay.
with browsing. I used the wrong word.
So the MyNoSQL database has a template method called select
Yes.
that takes a
Yes.
callable
I
object.
use that
And I said that callable object could make entries in the database if you want.
Right, but then how could that be? Because you want to use the condition based on your current database. So you're already selecting on the database elements. You can't select something that's not in the. You cannot get something that's not in the database.
No, but what you can do. So here's this query. That query, nothing stopping that query from creating an element and adding it to the database. Nothing is stopping the query from doing that. It's a callable object that has access to the database. It can do anything it wants with that database. Okay, that's all. That's all I meant.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions before we go on to, yes?
Are we required to do the connect things? Meaning connect or disconnect with the current endpoint and redirect to another?
I'm not doing anything with that in this demo. I am suggesting with this tab,
Are we required to do this for correct?
no, you're not required to do that. You're required to be able to connect in the first place, but you're not, you know, I think I put this here to suggest this connect tab, this blank connect tab, just to suggest that it's, you know, would be cool to have a window, you know, a little text box for local machine name, local port, listen button, and a remote machine name, remote port, and connect. And guess what? That would be a control. In this case, I would have one control, because the behavior is virtually the same, okay? Out of a control, my button, and you'd have a function that would put listen in the content of the button, controls button, for the local, and would put connect, you know. So again, I would use a couple of controls here to, you know. And it might be cool to, you know, I mean, you're certainly not going to do it for your project for submission, but it would be cool to have those two controls and then have another control here that just shows message traffic. Okay, I've done that before, and that turns out to be useful for debugging purposes. So. What would be really cool, and maybe I'll add it to my agenda on the summer project, what would be really cool, suppose you had this connect with those two windows and a message, you know, a list box for showing message traffic, but nothing's going to happen until you're doing stuff in some of those other, so it might be cool if I could tear that tab off and make it its own window, and now I could manipulate here and see what was the traffic that was happening. And that sounds hard, but it's actually easy, because all you really would have to do is you would hide this element. That's easy to do. One word attribute on the tab item will hide the element. So you hide the element and you build, okay, using that control. Now you have a window that's just that control. So now I can tear it off. Isn't that cool? I think that's nifty. You know, simple things amuse simple minds. All right. Any other questions before we go to strong types? Yes.
Sorry.
Hey.
Is that acceptable that I provide my metadata as an XML file?
You can do that without, you can do that and satisfy the requirements. I don't like the idea of a client building an XML file and sending it, the XAML, that way to the server. I think the server ought to be entirely responsible for building the metadata out of information the client sends them. That's a fairly minor distinction, but that's just my own mental model. That the problem that concerns me with building a XAML is somebody else might build another tool that's going to interact with that server, and they use a different syntax for the XML file, and now it just breaks everything. Okay, that's all. Yes, Yul.
Should we do like multiple check-in at once, or like one at a time should be enough?
Frankly, I would never do more than one at a time. I almost put that as a requirement. Thou shalt do it one at a time, but I chose not to. But I would do it that way. And to the user, you can absolutely make it appear to the user like they're checking in multiple files, but you're really doing it one at a time. That keeps it simple. That keeps the check-in process simple. And now, with a little tiny bit of little loop in the client, you can send multiple files. You can let them pick a list of things, and you just check in first, check in second, check in third, check in fourth.
Also, Professor, on like here on your local storage, is it really necessary to display the local storage?
Nope.
It's just like.
No, that was my model. I like that model, but because it's very consistent between the between the local and the remote. So, but no, you have no obligation to do that. I think most won't. Like a lot of the people here, your design is mostly done, and you don't want to tear it all apart. No. There's no requirements here at all, okay? Just a demo to help those who are way behind to make some quick progress.
So, like you mentioned, I was thinking like, can we make the dependency a new tab? And like whenever you add a dependency,
Yep.
you make it visible. And when you're done,
Yep.
you make it...
I would be very inclined to make another control and steal this XAML from here for the dependencies. And so here I click on something, instead of coming in here, what it does is maybe it just puts parent here, and now every time you click something here, something like that. I don't know. I haven't thought it out, but I like the idea of reusing that, not keep reinventing a different wheel, So if you're going to put 4 wheels on your wagon, let's not invent them 4 times, right? So, okay, can we move on to strong types? Let's talk about strong types. Okay, so strong types are interesting, I think. The ideas here are not mine. I've played around with some of the stuff. But basically, the implementation I'm doing here is described by Jonathan Baccara on his. He has a really nice fluent C++ blog. Yeah, you can leave. You don't have to stick around. So here's what strong types do. I have meters and yards. Meters and yards. And underneath they're both doubles. But I can't assign a meter to a yard or add a meter to a yard. I can add and subtract meters. I can add and subtract yards. But I can't mix them. A few years back, maybe before you were born, I don't remember, the European Space Agency sent up a probe to Mars, I think it was, or maybe it was the moon, I've forgotten. But the lander crashed because part of the team was using the metric system for distances, and the other part of the team was using the English system. And they just added stuff together and crasheroo, you know. $453 million worth of equipment is lying in a smashed up heap on the surface of a celestial body. So, so how do we do this? How do we keep meters and yards separate? And the answer is, let's go here to name types. The answer is I create a type. So here this T is my underlying type, so double, for example, for meters or yards. And I have here type name, which is a dummy element. It's only here. An instance of this type is never created. This type is here just to make it different from a name type that uses a different type here. So one name, my seconds name type would use seconds, my seconds type, and my yards would use a yards type. And because they're templates, they're different classes. Even though they're both name types, they're different classes, because they have different template arguments. If it's a different template argument, it's a different class. So, and there's just a little tiny thin wrapper, you know, explicit name type, so I can construct an element of this name type from the underlying type. I can get back the underlying type with a get. This is a cast operator that lets me, I have to do it explicitly, okay. I don't want silent conversions to happen, because that would get me back into the problem of being able to add meters to yards and stuff, okay. So everything has to be explicit. And I have an OStream for those name types. And I have seconds and milliseconds that use exactly this framework. So let's go back here to name type, go to the top. So here, using seconds equals name type double struct seconds type. Using milliseconds equals name type double struct milliseconds type. These are two different types. They will not interoperate. They're not doubles. There's no mechanism to make these interoperate yet. But I can come along and create this. Here's an operator plus for seconds. It's global plus operator. Okay. Just return seconds left-hand side dot get plus right-hand side dot get. Seconds minus. Now, without these, I can't add a second to a second. You know, all I can do is declare it and load it and look at it and, you know, extract its value. But now I can add them or subtract them, and I probably don't want to multiply or divide them. Okay? Because second is not a second squared. Okay? Second squared is like an acceleration. But seconds, you know, is a velocity or something maybe. So anyway, and I have a function I defined that lets me convert from milliseconds to seconds and from seconds to milliseconds. Okay, and just as a demo, I show you that accepts double. There's a way to pass a seconds or milliseconds into accepts double. Let's go back down here to the CPP term form. Yeah, that's where I am. So here's the seconds. So now I can say seconds, long time, 3.5 seconds. Seconds, longer time, 10.5 seconds. Milliseconds, short time, 2.8 milliseconds. Okay. Second, short time in seconds, 2 seconds, short time. Display it, and I did some type ID here, which I didn't want on the output, so and then seconds, some seconds equals long time plus longer time, shows you can add them together, and I display it. Some sec equals some sec plus 2 seconds short time, you can add them. Okay, so I took short time and converted it to seconds, I print them out, you know, and so on. So now, you know, here's my long time, 3.5 seconds, longer time, 10.5 seconds, short time, 2.8 milliseconds, you know, blah, 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 blah. I can add them together and so on. In the accepts only doubles, I can say with my seconds, some seconds dot get, that extracts the underlying double, and so now I can give that to a platform that doesn't understand my seconds. Okay, but some other function, some library function or something that doesn't understand my seconds type, I can still use its functionality this way. And I can't. So now let me stop here and go back again a little bit. So there's another strategy. So here I made the functionality. I defined this as a type that could only be loaded and viewed and extracted, the underlying variable. But now I've added whatever functionality I want, whatever combination functionality I want it to have. I can add. There's another way to do the same thing. If I go back to the header file, I'm going to, bear with me, here's a little helper, class CRT type, and I'll, you know, talk about it in a minute. Here's a struct addable. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my, I'm going to define class addable name type equal public. Addable, I'm going to add this, you know, which defines operator plus and operator minus. I'm going to inherit that, so now my addable name type inherits those. So instead of supplying them as external global functions, now I'm supplying it as a base class. And the CRTP, that's CRTP stands for the Curiously Recurring Template Pattern, and what that means is that I am inheriting using the derived class name. Here's addable name type, okay? That's the Curiously Recurring Template Pattern. So either way works. I'm using this for meters and yards, so I come back here to meters and yards. Now you don't see those external definitions. Now I just say, okay, you know, here's my meters, and I can add them because it's an addable type. I can add and subtract them because it's an addable type. And here's my yards, but I can't, these statements fail to compile. If I try to assign a yard to a meter or add a yard to a meter, it won't compile. Okay. So now what I have is a very focused, I can't mix meters and yards. I won't crash the Ariane lander okay, because that would fail the build. I'd get a build failure before I ever flew the doggone thing. So strong types are really interesting. In 2020, so there's a standard C++ 11 we're all using. C++ 14 has been ratified, is now the current standard. C++ 17 is all but current, okay? It's been approved, it just hasn't made it through the final, official process yet. C++ 20, a lot of stuff is in process now being worked on. And one of the things that's being worked on is a even more powerful version of the same idea. Okay, so Herb Sutter has a nice talk about it. One of the things I'm going to do this summer, so for example, in my repository, there's lots of places where I'm doing path and file manipulation. I'm adding a file name to the end of a path. But every once in a while, I'm programming at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm tired, and I add a file. To the file, I add the path at the end. And compiler's very happy. They're both strings. I'm very happy to add them together. And it builds, but boy, does it run funny. Okay, what's going on here? So it would be really easy to define a path type and a file type and allow the path type to add a file, but not allow the file type to add a path. So I can see a whole bunch of useful little library things. And I did it two ways here because I'm going to think about this summer and add to my utilities package. I'm going to add a strong typing, and I haven't decided whether I'm going to use the seconds version or the meters version. Probably the seconds version, because it's a little more easy to add exactly what I want when I want it to the name type. So I'll probably use that form. But at any rate, that's strong types. One last thing before we break. I wanted to quickly show you an implementation of tuple. So there's two versions that I've seen. Neither of them are original with me. This version was developed by Eli, I think is the right way to pronounce it, Bendersky, not me. But it's a kind of a cute idea. What he does to implement tuples is he has a tuple template type, struct tuple, but so this is tuple. This is the head of the tuple, and the tail. And now that tuple head and tail derives from tuple tail. And what that means is what I'm going to do is for each one of those elements, I'm going to have a base. The first head is my upper base, and then my next base, and then my next base, and then my next base. And they're all, this is a really tight little class. It doesn't add any size to that element. So now, remember that when I inherit from a base, that base is inside me. So down here at the bottom, the tuple, when I've stopped, I have each one of those element types, an instance of each one of those types in me, because it's in one of my bases. And it's no bigger than it would have been if I'd done it directly. Kind of an interesting idea. Now, and these two things are all it takes to do that. But a tuple isn't much good unless you can get the element out of the tuple. And that takes a little more work. You need this element type holder. And what that does is recursively walk down. So you give it a K, and it starts walking down, decrementing the K until K gets to 0, and then that's the element that you get. That's the element that it returns, okay? And it uses, there's an interesting construct it uses called enable if. This is new with the language. This enable if, what this does is, if the condition, this first condition, if this condition, this first predicate condition, if this is false, it doesn't build anything. If it's true, then it adds this, it builds this. And what it's depending on is something called SFINA. Substitution failure is not an error. Templates, when we do a specialization, you know, the compiler does some type substitutions to see, am I matching? And as a substitution fails, that is not a compile time error. It just says, I didn't match that specialization. Substitution failure is not an error. SFINA. A mean interviewer might ask you, what's SFINA? Okay. Substitution. And all it means is that when the compiler attempts a specialization substitution, if it fails, that's not an error. You've standardized on some type, and it's got to go look at each one of those specializations to see if it matches. And if it fails, that's not an error. Don't abort the compile. It just means it doesn't match. So what this does is that uses SFINA. This statement uses SFINA. If you satisfy the condition, build it. If you don't, nothing. So, you know, and so, you know, that's helping me build this element type holder. Okay, that says when I get to 0, build that element that gives me that type. Until I get to 0, don't build it. So I'm going to iterate until I get to 0, not building, not building, not building. When I get to 0, build it, and there's the type. There's that instance, okay? That's the idea. There is another variant that I didn't get around to. So, you know, here's tuple. You know, looks just like the standard tuple, and if we run it, it acts just like the standard tuple. You know, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, you know, you shouldn't use this. Use the standard. I'm just trying to say, here's how the library, here's a way the library could build this. Turns out it didn't build it this way. There's another way that's very like our type lists. Very, very like. It just adds a little tiny bit to the type list that we did to build the tuple. So, the week after graduation, I will probably go and add that variant to this sample. This is in Variadic templates. It's in handouts, repository, CPP, Variadic templates is where this sample is. And the week after graduation, I'm going to put the other variant, probably, if I don't get pulled off onto something more interesting, I'll add that. Okay, so I am basically done with all the material I wanted to talk about. Are there any questions about Project 4? Questions about midterm makeup? So here's the deal. On Thursday, the only thing I'm going to do is talk about midterm makeup and Project 4. No new material. I'm not going to enter any new material. If you don't need to get questions about Project 4 answered, I'm going to do the same thing on Thursday and on Friday, and the help session on Friday. Same thing, class Thursday. If you don't need that, you don't need to come to class. But understand that anybody that's got to do the midterm makeup So I'm going to give you lots of opportunities to ask questions Thursday, Friday, and the next Tuesday. So all I'm going to do is Project 4. You know, I'm sure there'll be some desperate, last-minute questions about Project 4 is due tonight at midnight, 5-point-a-day penalty if I'm late and I can't get this one thing to work. You know, I'm sure there'll be so. So Thursday, Friday, and Tuesday, all the same agenda: midterm makeup and Project 4. If you don't need that, you don't need to come. You're welcome to if you want to, but you don't need to. It's optional for you. Understand that after Tuesday, you will find both the TAs and I, after next week Tuesday, both the TAs and I very unresponsive, because we will be grading your Project 4s. We're going to be grading, because my grades are due the Tuesday after graduation. Really short period of time. So if you have questions about Project 4 or the midterm makeup, you got to ask them Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday, or you won't get an answer. Okay? You know, you can try me. You can try doing a Piazza, but chances are I won't answer it. You could, please don't send me an email. Use Piazza. But even if you send me an email, please, I probably will ignore it. I probably won't read my email between Wednesday morning and the following Tuesday after graduation when my grades are due. I probably won't even read my email. So if you got questions, you need to ask them. All right? So that means even if you don't have time, you got other exams to do, other courses to, take care of. You need to do a midterm makeup. At least look it over and see if there's, anything you don't know how to do, and then ask questions about it. All righty, I think we're done. Are we done, guys? All righty. See you all. Nice sunny spring finally arrived. Yeah. Maybe. Who knows? This is Syracuse, so I hope we don't have any more snowstorms. I don't think I could bear another snowstorm. Yes, Yul, what can I do for you?
On your design for the transfer of files.
Yep.
The first thing it sends is the header only when it sends files.
No. Here's what happens. So when the send thread is always inspecting the message. Yeah. If it sees a sending file, then it immediately calls the send files function. And what that does is it sends exactly the header that was in that message plus the body. It adds content length equal and the first block of the file. And it keeps sending those, but at the very end, when it exhausts the file and closes its own, then it sends a content length equals 0 message, and that's the only one that actually makes it out of the communication system up to the server.
But like on the receiver side, it's receiving 2 messages from the server. For example, if I say I did the check-in, and when I did the check-in, it's like I'm sending the file. So the first one it accepts with content length 0, and the second one there is another message with the same name with everything. Content length is 1024.
I think you're using an old version of the. I made a change, so if you come down here to the, let me put this down. I'm gonna kill this. And kill this. And here in the message passing com. Yeah, I mean it's been on the server now for a month, but
I downloaded that one like 2 weeks ago.
Well, then it should be okay. What you should see here is if you downloaded it from the right spot. If you downloaded it from the wrong spot, then you got an old one. But what you should see here is in I gotta find out where I remember where I put it. This is a send file message. And here send file dot close. Send file read block slash content link to message to. So I'm sending the message here. Okay, so here I'm sending the messages and I close the file. Okay, now in the client handler, here's receive files, and I'm enqueuing the message here in the, here, but I'm not in the bracket here when I say if receive files else enqueue the message. So if you don't have this else, in the old one I didn't have the else and it's sent to. So if you don't have that else there, then see, this assumes this model says receive file is going to send a message. All the messages, okay, but otherwise send this. So if you don't have that else wrapper around it, it'll probably.
I'll check that.
Okay.
Thank
Makes
you very
sense?
much. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was concerned that you just releasing the Project 4 demo. So submitted Project 3 obviously, and like that does a lot of the requirements for
Yeah.
Project 3, right? So I was wondering.
So this doesn't do any. My demo doesn't do any of the. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I was going over it last week. There's a few things, it doesn't have like the check-in view or something
Yeah.
like that. Really, there's still some stuff to be done. But
Actually, in Project 3, really all you had to do was. Let me pack up and we'll talk because there's another class comes in after me. All you have to do is. Oh, come on. Would you please shut down? There. Okay. So you're supplying a communication channel that you're basically just demonstrating that the communication channel meets the requirements. The model was that you're going to add the requirements testing stuff to the communication channel I gave you, and then you're building the GUI. And so this demo does pretty much what Project 3 does. I think what you should do is the following. I think you should work on Project 4, get Project 4 going, and then when your Project 4 is going, pull out the communication channel and the GUI in a form that matches what Project 3 asks for, which is not much more than just throwing stuff out of your Project 4, removing it, okay? Making sure that it runs. And then put a little, like I put those little text files, put a little text file that says, here's what's different in Project 3 from what was given in the demo. There'll be some, it won't be huge, but there'll be some differences. Okay. Especially your testing. I have almost no testing in these demos. Okay. So that's fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. I know. Don't ask me. I know what you want. You're still after that 2 points, right?
No,
No?
I
Oh,
mean, I
okay.
really want to join the design pattern. And Rebecca said you need to send an email to her.
You've completed this course. You don't need to. I don't know why she's saying you. What's your program of study?
Computer science.
Yeah.
Because she said the
If it's full, you can't get in.
no,
I don't know.
It has about 13 availabilities. It's only for the.
Okay, then
computer-
you and I will go talk to Rebecca right now. As soon as I get packed up, we'll go talk to her and try to get you in, okay?
And a question about the project flow
Uh-huh.
is: do we need to implement the persistent, the XML files?
Yeah, you should. If you don't, and we spot it, there's not a requirement to do that, but you'd lose design points because what happens, your repository isn't worth much because, all the information goes away every time you shut down.
Yes.
Okay, so, in fact,
No.
you almost have to implement persistence just to demonstrate you meet the requirements because the TAs aren't gonna,
Yeah. But in project 3, the Jana said, I don't need to do that.
In
And
project
I-
3, there wasn't, you didn't even have to have a NoSQL database in project 3.
Oh, yeah. In project 2.
In project 2, you had to
Jana-
implement
Jana
persistence.
told me I don't need to implement that. Then I was in.
That's wrong.
I was done by
The requirement clearly says you gotta implement persistence in project 2,
Okay.
right? I think it does, so. So you do need to implement persistence in project 2. All right, let's go talk to, I still, I have your stuff about that 1 or 2 points, and I will look at it. I've been real busy grading other stuff, and so, I've been grading
It's
the,
not crucial. It's
so-
only 1 point.
yeah, right. But I will look at it. It's sitting on my desk in my to-do pile, but no promise that you'll get it, but I'll look at it and see if I think you should get it or not. Okay, let's go talk to Rebecca. Let me see if I'm all, yeah. Let's-
For this one, the translator, if the local navigation control want to use
The local navigation doesn't need to use the translator at all.
because the destination path may be
But it's not sending any messages.
why?
Local, because it's just getting local files. It's not getting files from the server.
Because it has to transfer the file from local to the repo. So
Yeah, but what's happening is all it's doing, the local navigator doesn't have to do that. All it's doing is creating a message with a sending file attribute
Yes.
and it's posting it to the comm system. So, but what's happening is it's my main window is doing that. The main window is just using that
Yes.
nav control. So it's really the main window that's posting it. The main
because
window has,
in my design, there are many subfolders in repo storage.
uh-huh,
So when I check in a file from
Uh-huh.
a client,
Uh-huh.
the destination may be variable, maybe change.
uh-huh.
So
But I don't think the local navigator needs this. My local navigator doesn't. The main window is the guy that's posting that message.
so you mean all the files sent to the same folder in the repo?
Yeah, so I have a staging file. So the COM, the way I designed the COM, the send file and receive file, it always sends from a staging folder called send file to a staging folder called saved file.
Yes.
Okay, and then it's up to your proc to do a copy out of that into wherever you want to put it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know, but there are many subfolders. So
Yeah, but that's your model. You have to handle your model. I'm not going to design that model of.
So I can change the communication code because
You can change the communication code. You're welcome to change the. it's you got to be careful because it's easy to break. But
Because in Project 3, in my design, I put a attribute called repo path
Okay.
in the message, and
Yeah, okay.
the communication channel can read this.
Okay.
And know
So you want to?
the
Is your
destination.
question? Can I change the COM channel?
Yes.
And the answer is yes, you can.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And one more question. If I check in a file and like I'm checking in a.h and I want a repo received like a.h.2,
Mhm.
so what I can do for that? Because I have to update the version. in
Yeah,
the
what you got to do is you got to look at the most. You have to have a mechanism to find the most recent version of that file.
Yes,
Okay.
but for the communication channel, what I can do?
Communication channel doesn't have to know anything about that. The communication channel shouldn't know anything about version numbers. The communication channel never sends or receives a version file.
But how can I transfer the file with a new name? The same file with a new name,
You don't send the file with a version number.
with version
You
number.
don't send the file with a version number. It's up to the repository to add the version number.
So I have to create a temp folder to receive the
You
file?
could. That's why I have the staging area.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So what I do, my model is that the client will just send this file, and he's saying this is going to be a new version.
Yes.
The repository isn't smart enough to check them and see whether. So he just says this is going to be a new version, okay, and it sends that file with just the file name, and the namespace, and that goes in the staging area, and now the repository in the staging area grabs that file, adds a version number to it, and decides where to put it, and he does a file copy.
Copy again.
Yep.
Use the file system.
You're using the file system to do a copy into wherever you want to put it. Okay, that's the way I would do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
But
much.
that's not the only way to do it. You don't have to do it that way, but that's, I think, a good way to do it. Okay? Yep. Okay, let's go talk to Rebecca. Did I turn that off? Let me double check and make sure I did, because I want the tape to stop. I did.
And do we need to implement the checkout the multiple files or only one file?
I do it one file at a time. There's nothing wrong if you want to have your client, hide that from the user so the user thinks he's checking in a bunch of files. But what he's really doing is just sitting there in a loop, check in. That's the way I would do it. Rebecca.
Yes.
This young man needs to register for, he's computer science, and he says he can't register for design patterns.
Oh, because we have the CE reserve on it.
I thought that was going to be, we have a CE reserve?
For design patterns?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably every one of the CEs who want to get in have already registered. I hope they have. Why don't you give this guy permission to get in, okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Hmm.